Up next, enough is perhaps the message from the top leadership of the Congress party who backed Navjot Singh Sidhu to take over as the Congress party chief in Punjab. This is despite several last-ditch efforts by Amarinder Singh and those close to him to reach out to the Congress leadership at the 11th hour. This was all taking place yesterday. But late last night, the Gandhis took a decision. Some would say that this is a clear sign of them saying, look, we decide what happens. They decided to back Sidhu, and therefore, in putting their feet down, what was the message for Congress dissenters? Joining us now, the Lok Sabha MP of the Congress, Manish Tiwari. Thanks, Manish, very much for being with us. Now, the Gandhis have decided to go ahead and give Navjot Singh Sidhu the post as Congress Punjab chief. Now, is this basically a sign that Sidhu could do exactly as he pleases in Punjab? In other words, a very visible snub to the chief minister.
Well, Vishnu, I have now spent 40 years in the Congress party, and I have seen many changes take place in many states across the country. As the president of the NSUI way back in the early 80s, late 80s, I must have replaced umpteen number of presidents around the country. I did the same thing when I was the national president of the Indian Youth Congress. So these are routine organizational changes which take place from time to time. And I don't think it would be appropriate to read too much into it. The Congress leadership felt that they wanted to carry out a change in Punjab ahead of the elections. They've gone ahead and carried out a change.
No, but isn't there...
And so therefore there we are.
Isn't there more to it? That is this essentially a sign that dissent will not be tolerated, because many leaders close to Amarinder Singh who were trying to appeal to the Congress leadership, they in fact tried to do that yet again. There's been this back and forth. It's been going on for weeks now. Is this a sign that this is it? You need to accept it? Because the entire issue of dissent within the Congress is perhaps gotten to a stage where the entire viability of the leadership was being questioned.
Well, you see, in a political party like the Congress, there's always been a cross-section of views. And those views are articulated privately by different people to the General Secretary in charge, to the Congress President. In this particular instance, there was also a three-member committee which was headed by Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, which had the General Secretary in charge, Mr. Harish Rawat and Mr. J.P. Agarwal, as its members. So therefore, they spoke to a bunch of people across Punjab, may have come to certain conclusions. They made their recommendations. But having said that, you see, there is absolutely no way that the contribution and the seniority of Captain Amarinder Singh can be ever undermined. Let's not forget the fact, he spent now 50 years in the politics of Punjab. His stature is equivalent to, let's say, that of Mr. Prakash Singh Badal, who's getting on in years. God give him a long life. But if you were to put two people of comparable stature on one platform in Punjab, that is what the comparison would be.
But how will it actually work on the ground in Punjab between Amarinder Singh and Navjot Sidhu? Now, they have to work together. How will this take place? Elections coming up. How will they co-govern complex election processes? There's been so much animosity between them, at least politically.
Well, we'll have to wait and see as to how this plays itself out, because the Congress has to go into this election as a cohesive and a united force. And therefore, the seniority of Captain Amarinder Singh, the fact that we won every single election that we've contested in the past 4.5 years under his leadership by a very, very wide margin. These are factors which need to be taken into consideration. The fact remains that when Punjab was constituted in its present form in 1966, and if you traverse the path from 1966 across possibly 14 assembly elections, 2017 was the only time when any political party had won so many seats in the Vidhan Sabha.
But what about the selection of candidates? Because at this stage, Punjab, the Congress in Punjab is split between those close to Amarinder Singh and those close to Navjot Sidhu. In a situation like this, if you're talking about the selection of candidates with an election in mind, isn't that going to be hugely problematic?
There is no split. Let me tell you that there is no split. There is absolutely nothing of that sort. I think we are really tilting at windmills. We are trying to raise ghosts and then slay them. You see, insofar as the ticket distribution is concerned, Vishnu, you've covered the Congress party for a very, very long time. There is a laid down procedure and there's a set procedure which plays itself out. And if the Congress president were to accept some of the recommendations which our committee had made, which had looked into the unfortunate performance in Kerala, Puducherry, Assam and West Bengal, it would actually make the entire process of how do you arrive at names for different Vidhan Sabha seats even much, much more simpler.
Okay. Now, the entire issue of dissent within the Congress, the entire group of 23 leaders, as they were known, always, the Congress as a party say that you've always welcomed different perspectives, you believe in discussion. But do you believe that a stage has now come when Priyanka Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi have put their foot down, saying that decisions now need to be taken? National elections just a couple of years later, there is only so much that discussion does. After that, a decision must be made.
Well, insofar as the group of 23 is concerned, that's a nomenclature which was coined by the media.
Yes.
In fact,
that's fair game.
In fact, there are a bunch of people, who have given their entire lives to the Congress party, and they did feel that, certain things should be brought to the attention of the Congress president, and they were brought to the attention of the Congress president through the process of writing a letter. There have been follow-up meetings. There have been various steps which have been taken over a period of time. And yes, in any decision-making process, I mean, there comes a time when discussion has to end and a decision has to play itself out. And that decision may not essentially be to the liking of everybody, but what needs to be made sure is that it should be to the liking of a substantive number of people.
No, but is it therefore correct to interpret this that the decision as far as Punjab is concerned is a sign, that in the interest of the party, the Gandhis believe that this is something that needs to be accepted and there's no more scope for talk. This is the way it will be, and it's not just strictly limited to Punjab. It's a broader system of decision making, because the issue of leadership and decision making has been questioned over and over again, given your recent track record in elections.
Well, a decision has been made, and so therefore that decision would now play itself out over the coming months as we go into an election. And therefore, I guess everybody would have to walk the extra mile if we want to really pull off the election, which is an election which was in the bag at least till about 2 months back.
Okay. Now, as far as Navjot Sidhu is concerned, the fact that he is so mercurial, the fact that he's often sarcastic in his tweets, the fact that he seems to have spoken to the Aam Aadmi Party as well, in fact he has, yet the Congress continues to back him now, is that not a potentially problematic decision in terms of stability just months before an election?
Well, that's a question which you should address to the gentleman himself, because I'm in no position to answer for him, and neither would I really like to. But the fact remains that, as I was earlier pointing out, that all the horses will have to pull together. And the one thing which will have to be recognized is that there is a gentleman who is the Chief Minister of Punjab, and whose seniority, whose gravitas, whose experience, whose contribution to the polity of Punjab is at this point in time unparalleled. And so therefore, if that reality is not kept in mind, I'm afraid that the horses may pull in different directions.
All right, Manish Tiwari, thanks very much for joining us with your thoughts about what some of these decisions might actually be signaling. Thanks very much indeed. Joining us now, Rashid Kidwai, the senior journalist, somebody who tracks the Congress very, very closely. Mr. Kidwai, as far as Navjot Singh Sidhu is concerned, he continues to hit out, be sarcastic in his tweets. He spoke about, for example, in a tweet, leaving a royal household. So, I mean, there are no two surprises about what he was talking about over there. Do you believe the crisis in the Congress in Punjab is over?
Vishnu, I think so. If you read between the lines what Mr. Manish Tiwari was saying, he was not defiant. He was not signaling some kind of revolt. Of course, people know that Mr. Tiwari was not very happy, as many others were. But I see a big shift in decision-making apparatus of the Congress party. Remember, there's been Sonia Gandhi, who's the longest-serving Congress president, and even now as interim president, she had a style of working, consensus building, taking everyone on account and all. But this wasn't working since 2014 onwards. So I see a welcome change that now it's actually being passed to the next generation, and Priyanka Gandhi has come in and she has started asserting herself. Whether it will click or not, we'll see. But the whole thing that chief ministers, treating their respective states as their fiefdom, be it, Punjab or Rajasthan or in Chhattisgarh. Now this is going to change. And I think the supremacy of Congress High Command is going to be restored. Congress High Command had become almost defunct. So this is a new beginning, and we need to, look at it carefully.
Is this also a message on to other older leaders in the Congress party that, we welcome your opinion, but then as far as decision making is concerned, it's over? In other words, the group of 23 dissenters, some of them have been accommodated, others have, not really been accommodated like in the manner in which they would like to. Is this the message to them that, look, this is it? You say what you want to, but then we decide?
Vishnu, it's not so much about age. It's not old versus young or G23 versus that main organization. I think the whole thing is about ability to win elections, because after all, what is the objective of a political party? So that is being, said that nobody in the Congress is saying that Mr. Captain Amarinder Singh will cease to be Chief Minister of Punjab, or, he's being replaced by Sidhu. It's not the case. So, but all the committees and Congress consensus has been that it has to be Captain plus Navjot Sidhu, and Navjot Sidhu as a campaigner, effective campaigner. And there was a reluctance on part of Captain Amarinder Singh and some other people to accept it. Now, what Priyanka Gandhi did was that she pushed that, and she said, no, nothing doing, you have to do it. And right. Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, they all supported. So this is what I'm saying. It is significant development that Congress, which was like quite inactive, where decision making had become very tardy, suddenly it seems that worst is over.
All right. Mr. Kitwa, I'm running short on time. Thanks so much. The worst is over. I think we might need to revisit this conversation in a few months, given the recent track record of the Congress. But thanks very much for joining us this evening.